I will call the February 13th meeting of the Traffic Review Advisory Board meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome. The Traffic Review Board reviews items of interest regarding parking and traffic items. We are an advisory board, and our favorable recommendations today will go before the Oshkosh Common Council. The council can accept or reject any recommendation from this board. If you don't agree with our decision, you can discuss the item with any council member. If the board does not recommend an item, a council member may sponsor a new ordinance regarding that item. All items require 2 readings before the Common Council. The first reading will take place on Tuesday, February 27th at 6 p.m., and you will be allowed to comment on the item at that time, though the council will take no action. On Tuesday, March 13th at 6 p.m., the item will be on a second reading, at which time the council will take action. You will again be allowed to speak at that time. For this afternoon's meeting, I will read each agenda item, at which time, if you'd like to speak, please step to the podium and give your name and address for the record. I do ask that you keep your comments pertinent to the agenda item. The item will then come back to this board for discussion and action. Please call the roll.
Christensen.
Here.
Haas.
Here.
Szynski.
Here.
Krause. Absent. Weinschneider.
Here.
Becker.
Here. First item on this afternoon's agenda is approval of minutes. Anyone with any comments, concerns, additions, or deletions? Seeing none, call the roll.
Christensen.
Aye.
Haas.
Aye.
Szynski.
Aye.
Weinschneider.
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Here.
Which brings us to public comment. This board has adopted a public participation policy which provides 15 minutes for general public comment on a first-come, first-served basis. Citizens must provide their name and address and may speak on matters related to traffic issues within the authority of this board. Statements should be addressed to the board members and not to city staff or other persons. Items that are on the agenda should be addressed at the time the item is read and not during the period for public comment. Statements are limited to 3 minutes, and citizens may only provide comment one time unless special permission is granted by the board. Is there anyone that wishes to avail themselves of the opportunity? Seeing none, we will. Well, you're here for the 4th Avenue issue, though. Okay, that's separate. We'll deal with that in a minute. Okay, those are 2. No, that's okay. 2 separate issues, which then brings us to new business. A request to allow parking on West 4th Ave on West 4th Ave, south side from Michigan Street to 142 feet west between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. Current condition, no parking south side from Michigan Street to 142 feet west of Michigan Street between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Okay, this is a request from the gentleman that's here to speak on it, but basically it's this area here, which used to be across the street from the old sanitation public works building here, which is now vacant. So the no parking restriction was put in place to help with the vehicles that were making the turn here on and off the corner. So I talked to our public works department, and they don't see an issue with this parking being allowed there. And just to clarify, we talked for a minute about before the meeting, the intention would be to remove the parking restriction, so parking would be allowed at any time. That area is 31 feet, and it's not obviously heavily traveled anymore. There is no parking on the north side of West 4th at that corner to help with the line of sight at the intersection, other than the few vehicles that are probably going to be going down Michigan now to get to the new pier. This doesn't appear to be a need for the no parking there anymore.
If you'd like to speak, sir, this would be your opportunity.
Yes, my name is Kenneth Voss.
Step to the podium for us, please.
Where do you want
Up
me?
behind the podium. Microphone there for you. Name and address, please.
My name is Kenneth Voss. I live at 507 West 4th. It's that blue house on there. And the sign that says no parking says no parking 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., but there's nothing said Monday through Friday on the sign. And now that they're not using that big building for the garbage trucks anymore, I would like to have that changed so that we can park along there.
Okay. Does any board member have any questions for either Mr. Collins or the citizen in question? Jim and I did discuss this prior to the meeting. The intention is to, again, make this unrestricted, just as any other street would be,
Right.
except between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. when-
Yep, we would just remove the parking
Yep,
restriction.
and that was gonna be my next point, which is all the signs will come down, so there won't be, assuming council approves, it'll be anytime, anywhere, except between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. Any other questions?
Makes sense. Yeah.
All right, call the roll on agenda 1.
Christensen,
Aye.
Haas,
Aye.
Szynski,
Aye.
Wandschneider,
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Carried 5-0.
Agenda item 2, a request for no parking on Georgia Street West Side from South Park Ave to Osborne Ave during council-approved special events. Current condition, no parking restriction. Police sometimes sign with temporary no parking signs.
Okay, this is, we started discussing this at the last meeting. And then we basically, the board's request at that time, or recommendation, was to look at no parking during council events, basically from Osborne to South Park on the west side, which is this side of the street. And that would help alleviate some of the traffic congestion and make it a little more direct route. As we discussed the last meeting, it sounds like in the past, the police department's put temporary no parking signs along this area. If this was approved, what we would do is the board had asked about putting flip down. So it would say, basically what I'm thinking, it would say, if the ordinance passed, it would be no parking during council-approved special events. I talked to our sign department, what we could try, and this wouldn't be a bad area to test it. Last meeting, the board had recommended maybe where the police could flip it over to just say no parking when that special event was occurring, to alleviate maybe some of the confusion. We could put a hinge on the signs, and then the police could flip it over. We could try that and see how it works in that area. That was the best idea we could come up with. They don't really make them, but we could fabricate something to that effect.
So the actual wording on the sign would be what? Because I've got some concerns there, because if we put during council-approved special events, there's always the option for, I didn't know. So, again, if you're looking for opinion, until further notice, or just no parking,
Yeah,
straight out.
yeah.
Because if you
Very
throw
rare.
in during
Yeah.
council-approved events, somebody, again, I see the sergeant nodding his head back there. I can see that being a push from the citizens. I didn't know it was a council-approved event, even though the sign was down. So.
Right. Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting. It's difficult because the thought was we didn't want to remove parking at all times in case people.
Well, it would still be a flip-down sign, though. That,
Right.
Yeah, so
So my thought was the ordinance would say no parking during council-approved special events, but yeah, then the flip-down sign would say no parking.
okay, all right, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because, again, I can see.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a problem there, that there's not a consistency from ordinance to sign implication, or?
Right, that's what I'm thinking. We'd have to have the sign to match, because if you just put where you flip down a no parking sign, then people are gonna wanna know, well, where did that come from? And it's gonna have to match the ordinance. And if we're only gonna have no parking during special events, we somehow have to spell that out.
Wouldn't it be less confusing that way? Just say no parking, because otherwise,
Yeah, no parking.
You could either-
for an event. No
try to get away with,
Right, yeah.
or the people might generally be confused by,
Well,
this is really a council-approved event, which is kind of.
So what you're suggesting is putting no parking during special events?
yes,
I think the sign itself should just say no parking, but it should be used for, council-approved events.
I think special event included would be more specific. Not only that, if you put the signs a little closer together, there'd be less likelihood of people saying, I didn't know.
Yeah, somehow I gotta match, the sign should
'Cause
match the
that's-
ordinance.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse anyway, so.
So if we just put no parking, then it's suggesting that that's no parking at any time.
Yeah, especially.
But if it's flipped up,
Yeah.
it's not actually there. Again, any input on that, Sergeant?
I do. I want to go towards Mr. Collins a little bit more on this. Knowing what we have on Osborne,
Mhm.
and I threw some questions, that's why I was nodding my head, that's what we were getting
Yeah.
complaints about. I think it'd be almost more confusing if it just said no parking. I can see people that push the issue and say, well, I parked there last week.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the other side of the coin, yeah.
We do, I'm sort of used to different angles.
Mhm.
But I think if you specify, whether it be the no parking, the bolder letters, in special events, clarifying that, and that's gonna be obvious to them that, oh, there's a special event, it's pretty congested. I'd go more towards, specifying that event right there, that's why it's no parking.
Your input's appreciated. I mean, he's the one that's got to deal with it ultimately. Does anyone else have any questions on Agenda 2 or comments?
Yeah, I just want to comment, Osborne needs to have more frequency of signs, because so many times people just park there, regardless during an event.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that last meeting, and we are going to add at least one and possibly two signs, but the ground's frozen, so we tried to drive the post in, and it didn't get very far, so we're gonna have to wait till the ground thaws.
See you in April, yeah.
Dan?
Bill, sorry.
Question. The idea is that we will have a sign that says no parking during special events, as opposed to what Jim mentioned, a sign that would, let's say, flip down, and then it could be flipped up for when it's no parking.
No,
I don't-
my understanding was it was still going to be a flip sign
Right.
that says no parking during special events, essentially.
Okay.
What my thought was is the permanent sign will say no parking during special events, but then the police could flip down a sign that just says no parking when the event's going on, so then you would know that that you can't park there during that time.
That way, if they didn't have time, it would at least be covered under the.
Right,
special
so
events.
instead of going out and putting the temporary signs out, so I think so it's basically the best of both worlds. It says no parking during council-approved special events, but during the special event, like what you'd suggested last time, was have a flip sign that just says no parking. So then there's no debate. If the sign says no parking during that special event, they'll know.
Sergeant?
I do have one comment. I would say no parking, this is a special event. Instead of, we're going back to
Oh,
this during
sure.
special events.
Could do that too.
Is this a special event, that questionable thing? I would say no parking, this is a
Special event.
Special event in progress?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Just special
Yeah.
events,
Yeah.
separated with a line and then special event.
That clear as mud, Mr. Collins?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because
And
somebody
it's-
could say, well, it didn't seem all that special to me.
Well,
And it's a time saver, they don't have to pound in
True.
all the signs, they're there.
anyone else regarding item 2? I think we need a motion. I think we overlooked that on Agenda 1, but is there a motion to accept?
Move to accept. Motion.
Second?
Second.
Call the roll?
Christensen,
Aye.
Haas,
Aye.
Zizinski,
Aye.
Wunschneider,
Aye.
Becker.
Aye. Agenda 3. A request for no parking on Georgia Street, west side from Osborne Ave to 91 feet north. Current condition, no parking restriction.
Okay, this is also, from our last meeting, the board had suggested, to have no parking, it's basically from this driveway to Osborne. Obviously, the fire hydrant's already there, so that prevents a a little bit of parking, the 15 feet this way, but then it would prevent parking here, which I think makes sense, and it would keep that corner clear during, for whatever's going on at South Park. The only concern I had is if this resident had any concerns about it, but they must not have, so I haven't heard from them. But other than that, I think it makes sense.
Is it gonna be signed, no parking here to corner? Is that
Right.
thought
Yep.
process there?
We'd put a no parking sign with an arrow going this way.
Okay.
Anyone with any comments, questions on agenda 3? Look for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Last call for comments, questions, or concerns. Call the roll.
Christensen.
Aye.
Haas.
Aye.
Krasinski.
Aye.
Waldschneider.
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Carried 5-0.
Agenda 4, a request to allow parking on Grove Street, east side from Parkway Avenue to 120 feet south. Current condition, no parking east side from Parkway to 120 feet south.
I'll try to pull up here quick, if I can type. But this was just when my sign crew was out, they noticed they were replaced, this sign had got bent over, and they noticed doesn't appear to really be doing anything. There was at one time a building here, so there's this no parking at this corner here. The sign's right here. And it looks like it was probably because there was a sidewalk or some type of pedestrian access here at that time when this building was there. But we were looking at it now, and they were asking me about replacing the sign, and we decided there really isn't any reason for the no parking there anymore, since that building's gone and there's really no one that's even parking there.
Anyone with any questions or comments? Look for a motion to accept.
Motion.
Second.
Call the roll.
Christensen.
Aye.
Haas.
Aye.
Krasinski.
Aye.
Waldschneider.
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Carried 5-0.
All right, best for last. A request for a preferred alternative on the Oshkosh Avenue corridor.
Okay, this, and then I have our Public Works Director and Assistant Public Works Director are here as well, to help me out if there's any questions that, I believe, let's see, yeah, most of you were at the workshop we had with KL Engineering a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not gonna go through the whole presentation. But council's going to be, staff's going to be presenting before the council meeting this evening on some of the options in a workshop type format. But from a traffic review standpoint, what we're looking for is the recommendations as far as, generally as a board, we look at traffic flow and then traffic safety. So that's kind of what our focus is. I'm not going to, like I said, go through this whole presentation, but I'm going to just kind of get to the meat of it, because you guys already are aware of the background and that stuff. But basically, as you know, with Oshkosh Corp's headquarters being put on the golf course, and then some possible development along the corridor here, what we're looking at is extending Westfield and Kohler up into this area, which will then be the driveway to Oshkosh Corp. So there's basically four areas recommendation that I can see. But to back up a second, so what KL Engineering did is they did what's called a traffic impact analysis. So they looked at the current conditions and future traffic volumes, and it shows that the corridor is handling the current capacity, and it'll be able to handle the future capacity. That won't be an issue. So they looked through all that stuff. And then they came up with some alternatives. So basically, I think there are four areas. The first area would be the actual profile of the street throughout the corridor. So there's a couple different options. They have the current option, which is the 4-lane undivided. And then there's, a couple pictures of that. And then it goes through some of the advantages and disadvantages of that. I think you're aware of the existing conditions, obviously. Some of the disadvantages with the current conditions are the sidewalk that doesn't meet ADA. There's minimal space for snow removal and minimal opportunity for streetscape improvements. The advantages to keeping it like it is there's a low cost and it fits the existing right-of-way. We're going to get into the right-of-way a little bit on a couple of these options. But as far as the operations, like I said, they mentioned it has sufficient capacity for the through vehicles. Right now, the disadvantage is they don't have separate left turn lanes. So there's some delay for left turning vehicles and some lane utilization issues. But it does, like I said, it handles the capacity, it provides access to the roadways and driveways. And then as we talk, similar to like with when we don't have turn lanes or a two-way left turn lane, there's the disadvantages with the higher potential for rear end, the angle and the head-on crashes with the left turners, the conflict points, and then more difficult for pedestrians. So that's kind of the current condition. The option one would be, or an alternate one, would be a four-lane undivided. And what they would do here is actually put in left turn lanes at the intersection, like at Westfield, for example. And I believe and this is something that they're going to talk about tonight at the workshop, it would be similar to like this is Algoma and I want to say Murdoch. So that's, where you have the left turn lane and then you have two lanes of travel in each direction. So that's one of the alternatives. And it has some of the same advantages and disadvantages. The left turn lanes there would provide some buffer. It would provide some buffer for the left turning vehicles and also allow the through vehicles to get through. So it would help with safety and it would also help with the traffic flow. So just adding the left turn lane would provide some advantages and it would be a more moderate cost and have more minimal right-of-way impacts. Some of the other alternatives they came up with are going to require acquisition of some right-of-way, which is going to be more costly. So I believe, and James or Steve can correct me, but I believe this is what was in the TIF plan.
Should we just join you?
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, a scenario just like this is a four-lane undivided with the development of the two left turn lanes in each direction at Westfield Street is kind of the base model assumption that went into the budget preparation for the two TIF plans.
So that's the alternative one. Alternative two is the two-way left turn lane, similar to what we've referred to as a road diet in the past. But this would be a little different in that it would be, we haven't done one yet where it's 5 lanes. So,
The DOT did Jackson Street that way.
oh, yep, you're right. So that would be 2 lanes in each direction and then the center left turn lane. As we talked about with some of the other road reconfigurations, obviously the benefits there are the reductions in conflict points. It gets the vehicles out of the lane of travel and into their separate left turn lane. The main disadvantages here are going to be the need to acquire more right-of-way, which there'll be a cost associated with that. But it would also potentially prove pedestrian accommodations, and if we got more right-of-way, would allow for a better sidewalk. All the options still provide full access to all the roadways and driveways. This would be a little bit easier for the side street traffic as well. And this would be, so it'd be 5 lanes from North Kohler to Eagle, and then the road narrows and there's not enough room from North Eagle to the bridge it would have to narrow down to 3 lanes at that point.
Which could prove to be challenging, I would imagine.
Potentially, I mean, they had some plans on how they would transition it. Any way we go, it narrows at that point.
Yeah, the ability to get additional right-of-way to the east of Eagle Street is much more difficult. The houses on both sides of the street are relatively close, so there's just not a lot of ability between Keller and Eagle. With the planned redevelopment along basically the entire north side, it does create some opportunity to get additional right-of-way, although it would, create a bit of a shift in the road as you get to Eagle Street.
Additionally, KL did model that with the reduced capacity as being down to essentially 2 through lanes, there would likely be operational issues at the intersection with Sawyer Street due to the limited capacity on Oshkosh Avenue.
So that's alternative 2, and like I mentioned, I'm going through this kind of fast because most of you have already seen this at the workshop. So if there's any other questions, though, just feel free to jump in. The third alternative was a 4-lane divided, so basically a boulevard. This would have some aesthetic benefits. It would allow for the improved pedestrian accommodations, and would also potentially improve some of that safety. We'd still have the left turn lanes at the intersections as well.
Just at North Westfield.
All right, yeah, at North Westfield, right. This would be probably the highest cost option because of the right-of-way that would need to be acquired. But if you look at it as a gateway, that was one of the, I know at the workshop, that's something that the group was interested in.
Is there any cost estimate on that option, or?
I'll let you get into that, Steve. You just worked on that yesterday and today, so.
Essentially looking at trying to build the 4-lane boulevard section here. We're essentially looking at needing to do a full reconstruction of Oshkosh Avenue at that point in time. Rough cost on that estimate to reconstruct essentially from the Keller roundabout to Eagle Street is about $4.2 million.
And the TIF plans currently include about $940,000 for lighting improvements along Oshkosh Avenue and some streetscaping improvements.
So that money would be used in part to offset that $4 million expense, is that what I just
Yeah, I believe that's right. Right, Steve?
Make sure I get my right sheet here correctly. So we were looking at about, for the intersection of Oshkosh Avenue, just to do the widening for the intersection turn lanes, that cost was about $836,000 for the intersection itself, and that did include traffic signals, right-of-way cost. It did include about $190,000 in street lighting.
The 4.2 estimate for the full reconstruct includes lighting and.
Yes.
Is that just for the portion to Eagle?
That is from essentially the Keller roundabout to Eagle.
Okay. Is there any cost associated with Eagle to the bridge, or?
At this point in time, we're assuming that that would have to remain a 4-lane undivided. We would have to transition back into it. There were no cost estimates done with work there at this point in time.
And this would have to be accelerated project to coincide with the Oshkosh Corp construction, or?
I think, that's some direction we need to get from the council yet at this point. Certainly there is that thought to try to get it done before, Oshkosh Corporation's headquarters opens up. Another thought, as one of the things that KL Engineering did look at is the street as currently laid out would function, although at a slightly lower level of service, exactly the way it is now if we wanted to try to program longer-term improvements into the capital improvement program down the road. That is one level of analysis that was looked at and will be getting incorporated into their final report. So the timing of it, that is something we'll need council's direction on. but, it could function as is right now, just, during some of those peak times, you would see a reduction in service.
Would there be any plans to bury the utilities in this section, or?
That's not included in any of the cost estimates at this point in time.
I think some of the sewer and water was done over the past few years, going back to when the DOT was working in that area as well, right, Steve?
Correct. A lot of the sewers roughly from the Robbins Restaurant west have been redone with sewer and water. To the east, they're basically 70s vintage. They were replaced in the 70s. So the cost estimates for that area don't include redoing any of the sewer or water wholesale, only spot patches, realignments as necessary to accommodate the.
They wouldn't bury any like overhead cables or?
None of that's
Okay.
been included in the budget. It's something that could be looked at, but I believe it looks like that's just from memory, it looks like that's probably a 3-phase line system down through there, heavy electricity, so that's typically very expensive to underground.
Okay, so that's the corridor, and then we have the 3 intersections. So the intersections will start with everybody's favorite, the Sawyer Street intersection. This is probably a little bit longer term as far as the improvements go, but we did include it in the study since we were looking at the whole corridor. So, as you know, right now, it's kind of a goofy intersection with multiple traffic signals, and essentially you have, it's goofy. I mean, you could consider it 5 legs, but anyway, you're kind of familiar with this, with the 2 left turn lanes going on to Sawyer, and then the island here and the right turns going on to Oshkosh Avenue. So that's what currently exists, but in a long-term plan, we'd like to improve this so that potentially that Sawyer Street could potentially be linked up further north, and we could get better access to Rainbow Park as well, improve this whole access in this whole area here. Traffic safety is not bad in this area now, but it's just a really goofy intersection that I think everybody's desired that it gets improved at some point.
Confusing to those of us that haven't grown up with it.
Yep. True. But just, real quickly, just the advantages of keeping it as is, obviously, is no cost. It's an existing right-of-way. It's compatible with the lift bridge. The disadvantage, like we said, it's a complex intersection with multiple signals and traffic control devices, and it doesn't meet the current MUTCD standards or pedestrian standards. So if for no other reasons, we'd like to improve it for those, to get it up to the current standards. So they looked at a couple options here. One of them would be a single traffic signal. That would be similar to where it is now, but it would make this, it would simplify the intersection here. The advantages of that would be it'd be low cost, minimal right of way. It would simplify the intersection, and it would be compatible with the lift bridge. Any of the alternatives, one of the big things that we asked Kale to consider was the implications with the lift bridge there. The disadvantages here, it doesn't improve access to Rainbow Park and to Rainbow Drive. So that's alternative 1. Alternative 2 is an extension of North Sawyer. There's basically a couple different options here based on how much property would have to be acquired north of Oshkosh Avenue. The city does have now an agreement to purchase Rupp's Bar and already owns a couple of these buildings here, so this is potential. This first option, though, would acquire, there's a couple duplexes up there that would require the city to acquire through this area here, and that would be the main disadvantage. The advantage would be more traditional intersection and more pedestrian friendly. This option here, which would be alternative 2B, basically avoids these duplexes here. But it would require more vehicle maneuvering in a tight space, which is basically 175 feet from Oshkosh Avenue to get over to Rainbow Drive here.
So in that particular alternative, Jim, anyone going eastbound on Oshkosh Ave makes a left, goes around the curve to get to Rainbow Park, is that what I'm seeing?
Yep. Yeah, this is basically an alley here, so they would improve that alley. So, yeah, if you were coming east, you could turn left here, and then you'd have to make a right to get into the park, which one of the disadvantages here is the way that traffic flows in Rainbow Park now for the boat launches. The entrance is up on, basically on the north side of this parking lot. So it would be quite a bit of maneuvering. You'd turn left here, and then you turn right. If you were taking your boat in there, then you have to turn left here and then get in there. But that would,
But that's better than the way it is now, because you can
Right.
get there if you're eastbound.
right, exactly, yep. What's that? Oh,
Turn
yeah.
block early.
Turn
Yeah.
at Fox, so.
Yeah,
Well, but
Fox.
then you gotta go through the neighborhoods,
Yeah.
and, yeah, I mean, it's,
Turn left earlier, but.
And it's a nightmare trying to exit back out of that area.
Yep. And then this alternative, 2C, would also avoid these two duplexes. The disadvantage would be a little bit of a skew here. The left turning movements, they said, would work. They'd be a little less desirable than if you could just make a regular, angled left turn. But they said that their design, it would work here just fine. And it would avoid those duplexes.
Are those little white buildings garages for the duplexes?
I believe those are actually the aprons.
Okay, okay, thanks.
So those were the alternatives for Sawyer. So basically you have alternate 1 and then 2A, 2B, and 2C.
is it fair to say that 2C gives easier access to Rainbow Park for everybody? Is that a fair statement? Both eastbound and westbound traffic on Oshkosh Ave?
2A is probably the easiest with the true 90-degree intersection.
Well, my point in 2C is you're getting Rainbow Park bound traffic out of the flow sooner to alleviate a little bit of volume at the actual traffic light.
Coming from the.
Coming
east.
from the east, yeah. Because I'm assuming they're gonna loop off right there. Or am I not seeing that the way it was intended?
Like there'd be a separate
Don't-
right
yeah,
turn lane?
It doesn't look like there's much of a turn lane. Certainly if there was nobody trying to continue straight through and everybody was trying to turn right, I think you would certainly see a benefit there. Without developing an actual right turn lane, once you get a car or two that's going straight, I think you would be blocking off that benefit. I don't think these, at this point in time, do not include a dedicated turn lane there. It doesn't look like.
Again, it's,
It would be something that could be considered. You are a little bit tight coming down from the bridge to be able to develop much of a turn lane, but that might be a possibility to look into.
Yeah, and
questions?
yep, and I'll get to it towards the end what Kale's recommendations are, but they did recommend 2A or 2C is basically, for the reasons that you just mentioned. Those probably have the best access to Rainbow Park and Rainbow Drive along with improving the intersection. The difference would be, the main difference is this one requires acquiring the duplexes and this one doesn't.
Is there a cost estimate on the duplex acquisition? Or?
I do not believe we did. Let me look through my estimate here quick for this intersection.
I don't
More
remember seeing
importantly,
it,
is
but
it a willing participant or a non-willing participant? Because that's gonna dictate the cost.
I don't believe that anybody's had that conversation at this point in time.
No, I did not have, well, actually, I did have, based on the assessed values, I had about $235,000 in for the cost of the two duplex properties, total. based on the assessor's website or information, one of them was at 128,000, which I believe is a duplex, and the other one's a single family, I believe, that was at 67,500.
And would there be a construction cost difference between those two alternatives?
There hasn't been an analysis done to break that down.
And then the alternative 3 was a roundabout here, which obviously, you know, the board's aware of the benefits of roundabouts. It would also provide full access to Rainbow Park, reduce traffic through the neighborhood, be some corridor consistency. The disadvantages are the high cost. It would also, we'd have to acquire some more right-of-way as well. The main disadvantage is it's not compatible with the lift operations, so that's the kind of the killer there. In addition to, there's some challenge in design here. This is basically the same dimensions as the Kohler roundabout, but there's the historical smokestack here that has to be designed around as well.
And there's a big mound of dirt there that I'm not exactly sure what is in that mound. So that would present some environmental challenges. As we do know, there has been some historic spills in this area. We did encounter a lot of contamination when we did the dredging of Sawyer Creek. That was immediately related to previous activities on this site. So those berms would lead me to suspect there was some on-site beneficial reuse of contaminated material that, if we get into those berms, would drive the cost up even more.
Okay.
On-site beneficial use.
Yes, instead of hauling it to a landfill, you build a berm and put some topsoil on it.
Yeah, commenting on your careful choice of words.
So that one, you know, I think traffic-wise, this would be an ideal location for roundabout, but the lift bridge just doesn't make it feasible. And we did talk to the engineering company about it, and they said they really couldn't think of a good way to make it work. So that kind of kills that a little bit. Then the other 2 intersections we have to look at, these are the more, of the 4 items we're looking at, these are the more immediate items, as they're going to need to happen within the next couple of years in conjunction with the Oshkosh Corp headquarters being built. So the first intersection is Oshkosh Avenue and North Westfield. As you know, the current operation there is with a traffic signal. What they are recommending improvements here, and that would be the left turn lanes on Oshkosh Avenue, and then we would be extending north Westfield Street to the north there. The advantages to this would be the lower cost and right-of-way requirements compared to the other alternative I'll show you in a second, which is a roundabout. And then it also provides pedestrian signals. One of the things that we're struggling with roundabouts is pedestrian access. And here with the daycare being in this area and then Evergreen being a little further south, the thought is that with what's potentially going to have some destinations over here with some walking trails and parkland, that should be popular pedestrian crossing. So a signal would give that break in traffic for those pedestrians to cross more easily than a roundabout would potentially. So that's the traffic signal with the left turn lanes, and that was the original thought process when this project first came about, is to do something similar to this. And then the second alternative was a roundabout. And traffic-wise, you know, there are a lot of benefits to the roundabout, and it does provide, you know, corridor consistency with the Kohler roundabout and then the other roundabouts on the on-ramps and off-ramps at Highway 41 and then just west on Highway 21 there. The disadvantage is the higher cost and the significant right-of-way would be acquired to the north of Oshkosh Avenue here to accommodate the roundabout. The other disadvantage is obviously is it's not quite as pedestrian friendly. I think something that'll happen, and we're going to talk a little bit about the 9th and Kohler roundabout, is potentially whenever we get another roundabout is moving the pedestrian crosswalks back a little bit from the roundabout. I think that would help, but in this case, it obviously would be more difficult for the pedestrians to get to the park and back. So those are the two alternatives at that intersection. Then we are looking at the Oshkosh Avenue and North Kohler Street intersection. We asked Kale to look at that with the need to extend Kohler to the north. So we currently have the roundabout there. The advantages there are obviously there's there's gonna be minimal. Well, if we did nothing here, there'd be no cost. And it would still, the capacity would still be okay. There'd be no right-of-way impacts. The disadvantage is there was some issues with intersection capacity once Oshkosh Avenue, Oshkosh Corp is built up north of here. And there might be some interaction issues with the Highway 41 roundabouts once they reach capacity. So what they came up with was alternative one, which is a roundabout with improvements, which it improves the intersection capacity. The disadvantage would there would be some additional costs and some right-of-way impacts. There still might be some issues with the Highway 41 roundabouts, but basically what this is doing here is adding a right turn bypass.
Okay.
It'd be very similar to the northbound approach then, in that you have a right turn only and a straight left.
So the thought was that these vehicles coming from Oshkosh Corp that are probably, we actually, as part of that study, they got some information on where the Oshkosh Corp employees are coming and going from, and majority are coming from Highway 41. So this will, whenever they're leaving, this is going to be a real popular movement, the south to west.
So there's really no reconfiguration of the roundabout itself per se.
Right.
The approaches.
Yep.
It's just the one approach.
Well, yeah.
In reality, it's the southbound approach, adding the right turn dedicated lane.
Was there any thought given to incoming traffic and increasing the capacity there? Again, because at 7:45, there's probably gonna be a lot of people going in.
It's only one lane, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, they didn't look at that, they did look at the traffic projections, and their study found, and they looked 30 years out, that this would meet the capacity needs for throughout the day. Obviously during peak hours, and they looked at peak hours 30 years out, obviously it's gonna be a little bit heavier, but you also have multiple access points. They'll have Kohler and Westfield as access points. But their traffic modeling showed that it should handle the capacity.
I believe they were all at level of service C or better at the
Right.
30-year out.
And again, I mean, it can be sort of understood. I would hope that people coming in from the east would actually use Westfield. to
Right.
get to campus. People coming from the west would use Keller. Can't make
Right.
it do that, but that would seem to make more sense.
Correct. So basically then, what KL recommended at the last meeting was for the corridor to do North Kohler to North Eagle as a 4-lane divided. However, as Steve mentioned, after that, we had some time to look into some of the costs, and that would be, this is something that came up relatively recently, because as part of the TIF plan, the city was looking more at, adding the left turn lanes and keeping it kind of the existing layout. And then from North Eagle to Fox River would be what it is now, which is the 4-lane undivided. And then for the intersections, the Oshkosh Ave and Sawyer, which I mentioned before, they recommended the alternative 2A or 2C, which are the traffic signals with extension of Sawyer Street. Oshkosh Avenue in North Westfield, they recommended alternative 1, which is the traffic signal with left turn lanes. And then Oshkosh Avenue in North Kohler, they recommended the roundabout with improvements. So from a TIF standpoint, the Westfield and the Kohler will be taken into account, and those were what was included in the current TIF plan, I believe, correct?
Yes.
And then the same thing, the difference with the corridor, though, it was the alternative wasn't the boulevard that was included, so that's something that, council will be wrestling with as we go here. Couple other things before we get into the final discussion here is, so tonight, we're talking about this here at council. James and Steve are gonna be doing a workshop type presentation at 6 tonight at the council meeting to discuss some of these different options for the corridor. And then there'll be a Plan Commission Neighborhood Information Meeting on February 20th. So if anybody's watching tonight and wants the full report, Kale Engineering will be there at that meeting. And then council will be taking action potentially on February 27th after they get the input from tonight's meeting, our meeting here, the council meeting, and then the Plan Commission Neighborhood Information Meeting. So what we're looking for from the Traffic Review Advisory Board are the recommendations on those 4 issues, which would be the corridor and then the 3 intersections.
Do you have anything to add, Mr. Clayman, since you're here? Okay. Hey, no problem. The question I have for you, Jim, is are you looking for a preferred option, either 2A or 2C as it relates to Oshkosh Ave North Sawyer? Because you laid out both of them.
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial.
Well, then why don't we do that first, because it's obviously going to have a ripple effect potentially on the rest. So I would invite anyone to throw in their 2 cents on the Oshkosh Ave North Sawyer Street intersection, whether they prefer either 2A, 2B, or 2C. So we can narrow that down first and foremost.
I'll move to vote on 2A.
Second. That was quick. Anyone have any comments about 2A?
So basically that's, just so you can visualize it, that's basically making the 90-degree turns at the signal here. So it's basically a traditional intersection.
I got another question, kind of related. Are they gonna redevelop the properties to the west on that block, or?
I think that would be the hope, that whatever is not needed for right-of-way that the city has acquired would be available for redevelopment.
I'm not aware of any current plans in that area.
Yeah, because it seems like they bought properties in excess of what would be needed for the construction. I mean, so, like, what did they already buy, like 3 or 4 properties, or?
2 pending the approval of the reps bar would be the 3rd in that location.
Want to have any comments about 2A specifically? Since that's the issue on the table.
Would 2B, would that be less costly, as you're not going through that area where the 2 condominiums are? Or the duplexes, or whatever those structures are?
2B would be a little less costly, but would create, some additional challenges from a traffic movement standpoint. So yes, a little bit less costly, but adding some additional challenges.
But you would see that as potentially creating a backup. Let's say if there are many people launching their boats, that could be a bottleneck there.
I think you might see it more, if the entrance to the park stays where it is, which is north of what's shown on the screen, you might see it more of a bottleneck if you get several people trying to leave at one time. You might, kind of back up around that corner, because at 175 feet, Jim, with a truck pulling a boat, you're probably gonna get, 2 or 3 in that stretch at most?
A vehicle's probably 22 feet with a boat, yeah, you're probably.
45 feet easy with the boat, yeah.
And with a little gap, you're probably only gonna get 2 of them lined up in there. So it certainly could create some additional backups trying to leave the park, assuming the park traffic flow doesn't change.
Anyone else? All right, then let's, if we can, by show of hands, express a desire for either 2A or 2C by voting no. So all those in favor of 2A being the recommendation from this board. I see 3. Ross?
Yeah.
Bill?
I like 2C.
No, we've got a majority on 2A. So then now 2A is part of the package of recommendations. Does anyone have any comments, concerns, questions on the package as a whole? Now to include alternative 2A for the Oshkosh Ave North Sawyer Street intersection.
Yeah, and I tried to kind of include their recommendations all as one, so we could do that. The only thing that has changed now is, now that we got some costs on the corridor, they had recommended the boulevard or the divided. So if that's something you want to consider or not.
Well, and I was assuming that was part of the entire totality, the corridor as well.
Right.
Both
Yep.
from North Keller to Eagle and North Eagle to the river.
Right.
So both including the corridor and the intersections.
Yep.
Are we taking them all separately then?
No, my intention is to do it as a lump, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
Unless there's a desire on someone's part to pull it apart. Certainly that's your prerogative if you've got issue with anything else. It was just that there was an obvious conflict, because we had to make a choice between 2A or 2C on that first one.
I think the intersections are pretty straightforward, but on the corridor, you get into that kind of one is much more costlier than the other.
Is there an alternative percolating in your head over there, Dan?
Well, it would either be to go with the 4-lane undivided for the whole corridor, or the option that's recommended. You're looking at $4 million that wasn't initially budgeted for. And you also, the Sawyer intersection is gonna be over at like $6 million.
That was included in the
Yeah.
TIF plans,
But I'm
by
just,
the
you're
way.
adding an additional approximately $4 million.
Just for clarification, the Sawyer intersection's about,
Okay, I thought I seen earlier estimates that it was closer to 6
Get
in the
5.7.
paper or something.
5.7, oops, okay.
At least that's the numbers you gave me to put in the presentation for tonight.
All right, must not have gotten to the bottom line on the total here.
I know, I saw it somewhere, there was, closer to 6, but.
So I think, the corridor, it's, for the board's consideration is, does 4-lane undivided, does it meet the traffic flow and safety needs, versus, the alternative, which is the boulevard, and is, obviously there's a cost associated with that. And I think that's, either way, I think that's a debate that's gonna go beyond, the board, and they're gonna have to decide that, but we are looking for a recommendation from the board as far as preferences.
Well, the 4-lane divided is actually, it is more expensive. There's no doubt there, but it's also safer. Push comes to shove. because there's gonna be 12 feet between opposing traffic flow?
Yeah, what were you, what
What's-
was the median?
What's the median width?
The median width proposed on the corridor plans varies between 12 to 14 feet according to the diagram here.
Okay. So there's that, yes, there's the ongoing maintenance, because someone's gonna have to mow the grass and trim the tree, but that all coupled with the fact that I think it makes a better presentation coming in. Speaking only for myself, I think that's money potentially well spent.
As a comparison, do you
That
know what the
point.
width of the Sawyer Boulevard is?
I believe that one's in excess of 20.
Oh, really? Oh. Yeah, I know that seems rather wide, so I
Yeah, I
kinda wanna
haven't measured
compare
that
the-
one. Jim, do you still have Google Earth up on,
Google Maps, I don't have.
can you measure on
Earth up.
Google Maps? I'm not sure. No? Okay.
Try it if you want. I'm not that sophisticated with it.
Here, you drive.
Go right to Google Earth. All right, how do I get,
Grab the guy and drag him.
I wanted to get out of street view. Oh, here.
Blue arrow on the left.
That should hold it, right? Wrong hand. That's virtually the same width as the pavement on each
Yeah.
side, which is a parking lane and a driving lane, and I believe a bike lane now too, right, Jim?
Yeah,
So, yeah, that's a,
probably 20 feet then, yeah.
Good solid 20 feet.
I don't see a way to measure on this one.
So the new one would be like about two-thirds of this approximately.
Roughly, yes.
Looks about the same size as the 20-foot scale bar in the lower right there now.
Yeah.
Other comments, concerns? I mean, do you want to make the change, Dan, to the corridor for Keller to Eagle?
No, I don't really have a huge problem with it. I
Okay,
just wanted to bring it up for discussion.
sure. Anyone else on any piece or part involved?
Move to
Going
accept all the recommendations.
Second.
Further comment or consideration or question? Seeing none, call the roll.
Christensen,
Aye.
Oz,
Aye.
Szynski.
Aye.
Juan Schneider,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
carried 5-0.
Which brings us to staff statements. Pedestrian push buttons installed at Main Street and CP.
Yes, so that is something that we just completed probably about a month ago, is that that intersection with the convention center there and the hotel, we get requests every so often to improve the pedestrian accommodations there. So what we did is we put in pedestrian push buttons, which then what it'll do is it'll allow pedestrians extra time to cross, and it won't throw, Main Street's coordinated, so it won't throw the whole, when you push the button, it'll throw the corridor out for a cycle, but at least it won't do it throughout the day when there aren't pedestrians there. So that's the benefits of having the push buttons there. It'll give the pedestrians some extra time, and it won't throw the coordination out all day. So that was a popular request basically from, I've gotten that request over the years from the hotel, from 4 Imprint, and from the convention center. So that should help with the pedestrians in that area.
Is this on both sides of
Yes.
CP?
Yep. Well, it's basically to cross Main Street.
But I was just wondering if it's just on the south side or the north
It's-
side as well.
Yeah, it's the whole intersection. You can cross any way now, any of the four-way north, south, east, west. And
All
then,
right, Ninth Ave and Keller Roundabout.
I am gonna try to pull this up here. This is something that I know that Mr. Shazinski asked about. He had inquired about this about a month or so ago, and I wanted to bring it up because it's also a question that I get, just from citizens quite often. And it has to do with the roundabout at Ninth and Keller. And what the question I get most often is, if you go out there late afternoon, this lane, which is basically the right straight left, can back up all the way back to probably about Taco Bell during peak hour. Granted, it isn't like that throughout the day, but it's during peak hour. So the question that I get is, could you make this the through left lane, which then this would basically be the right through lane here. So I talked with WISDOT, their traffic engineer, about this, and he gave me some history here. He did some traffic modeling for me, and how this intersection would function if you added a through lane through to the left here, which then would make this outer lane a straight and a right. Basically, you wouldn't be able to go left from this lane then. And they modeled it in, so he looked back and they modeled it for the year 2035. And it showed that there were 630 left turns, 295 straight, and 275 right at the peak hour. So we're thinking that's why this was a left only. In the original design, it actually showed it the other way. It showed this as a straight left and this is a straight right. So I'm thinking that they looked at those traffic volumes, and that's one of the reasons it was designed that way, was based on that traffic volume. But when we model that at the peak hour, the inner left lane's delay was 46 seconds, which is level service to E, which isn't great, but it's serviceable. And then the outer right through lane showed the same delay, so it basically was showing 46 seconds. And then he modeled it with the revised layout, adding that through to the left, and that resulted in the delay increasing to 55.9 seconds in the inner lane, which puts it at an F, so basically shuts down the inner lane. And then the right lane improved to 38.2 seconds. So overall, the left lane fails, the right lane got a little bit better, but overall, the delay increased to 47.5 seconds, so it increased about a second and a half. So that's just basically what we looked at, and without doing the detailed analysis of current, there's also two other issues there that we would have to look at. Number one is, if you did add that the through capability here to that left lane, anybody who needed to get on Highway 41 would have to be in this inner lane and then make this short transition over to get on the highway. And he said they have had some issues with that in Neenah at the roundabout, that they are having some crash issues with that because there's such a short distance to get over. So that's another challenge. But the other issue here is this roundabout was designed for this. It's hard to tell with this picture, but it's not perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
Okay. So like if you look at the Washburn and 9th roundabout, it's symmetrical.
Click in the lower left where it says satellite there, Jim. Just click that. Oh.
Okay. So you can see there's a little bit of it's flat there. So this roundabout was designed to accommodate that left turn lane. So basically that was the other concern he had, is if we ever did want to change it, you'd probably have to look at the geometric layouts of this roundabout in total, which would be pretty costly. So the bottom line is I think we're kind of stuck with how it is for now, but at least I wanted to get you that information.
Then the other question I had was about possibly closing that driveway, the first driveway, kind of in front of Little Caesars there.
Yeah, that I didn't get a chance to look into real detail. I don't know, Steve, if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, that's quite a process. I'm sure that was in the plan development maybe at some point that they had access here and.
I'm guessing so. Generally, closing an access is a major, viewed as a significant taking, in doing that. Not that it can't be done, but I've used that one during peak hours, and it's not great, but generally, you know, if someone will usually let you in, and then if you're trying to get over to that inside lane to make the left, it works out pretty well, but it can be a challenge.
So it's something we can keep an eye on, but
I think even before the roundabout, that access point created challenges at intersection.
Well, because you can only use it as an exit, I mean, oh, well, you're not gonna get, well, I mean, some people can come in there too, but I mean, you can't come in from the other direction, you know.
Right. You wouldn't want southbound traffic trying to come in there. It would create
yeah, really.
terrible
The
mess.
roundabout, yeah.
So I was just thinking that not that many people used it compared to the
There was a
other-
median there before, yes. Yeah, that median used to come around the curve. There used to be another access point at the S-curve just north of Pizza Hut. That's the one that got closed as a part of the roundabout construction. That was the first one you could get into from southbound before this reconstruction.
I was wondering if they ever gave any consideration to like closing a number of driveways and then putting a stoplight similar you'd have by McDonald's there. You know, so you have like,
Well, McDonald's is a public street though, too. Menard Drive is a public street that has the signal there.
is Target, is that considered a street also?
No, that one's not. That's two
Okay.
driveways.
so that was basically just some follow-up and some information. And then the final staff statement is an update on the merging of the Parking Utility Commission with the Traffic Review Board, and that is on the council agenda this evening. It looks like there's a pretty good chance that's going to happen. The Parking Utility, as I mentioned at a previous meeting, had voted that they thought that made sense. And I know we've talked about it here and thought that made sense. So pending the council approval, then that would take effect sometime within the next month. And basically what it would be then is the parking utility mostly deals with off-street parking issues. So it would make sense then this board would deal with any of those issues in addition to what we currently are.
And is there anyone from Parking Utility that wants to be involved here?
Unfortunately not
Okay.
this time.
So then my follow-up question is, it's going to be essentially business as usual
Correct.
with a new name
Yep.
and a few responsibilities.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Yep. And brings me to my last announcement. We still do have an opening on the Traffic Review Advisory Board, so if anybody's interested, you can either get an application online or stop by the city manager's office. It's a pretty simple process, just real short, one-page questionnaire, and then if qualified, then the mayor would make an appointment.
I don't know that it's on the agenda. Oh, there is. I take that back. Anything for upcoming agendas, requests?
A number of people brought up that 11th and South Main intersection about the stoplight. Does that work 24 hours a day for, they say, you know, there's not really much traffic on 11th, but then they get stopped on Main.
It basically it's a camera that actuates that intersection, so you should not get stopped on Main unless there is vehicles on 11th, and that operates 24/7. However, there were the first couple of weeks we're having some issues with getting it to operate exactly the correct way. So we're still working through a couple of bugs with. It's probably more technical than you want to know, but you have to
Because,
draw zones where the vehicles are, and there's some issues with that we've been working through the last couple of weeks. But that is how it's going to operate.
Yeah, because a lot of people were saying they were getting stopped on Main when there wasn't any cars on 11th. Yeah.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen. And I believe we have that almost worked out.
Anyone else? Future agenda items? Well, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.